Hello there, this is Robin Gamble. Welcome to the Scholar Warrior podcast. Now, the idea of the Scholar Warrior has been around for thousands of years across many great cultures. And the concept is this, that one of the highest achievements in society is to become skilled in the martial arts while also pursuing the scholarly pursuits of painting, poetry, music, philosophy, and more. So it's here that I interview martial artists as well as artists in various fields, so that you, the listener, can gain a peek into their techniques, skills, and strategies for success. And so that you, the listener, may gather these gems and apply them on your own path to self-mastery and excellence. Enjoy. Right, so welcome back to the second part of our meditation discussion with Jon. And in this part 2, we are going to have a look at the work in Jon's paper, which, as I've said before, I found to be excellent. So in this paper, he sets forth a common way to think about and discuss meditation that helps researchers with their research, and it also helps empower people that are studying meditation, no matter what level of their experience. So it helps them to be able to understand and articulate the practice of meditation so they can get a better sense of clarity with what they're doing. So I've got some points here that I think are pertinent in regards to Jon's paper. So when it comes to meditation, Jon, why is it important to know what we're talking about? When two people meet and talk about meditation, why is that?
Yes, good point. Well, this kind of relates to why I jumped into this at the first time. I'd never written a paper outside of my own particular field. I've never written a paper for publication before. I've never done research like this before. And we also must give credit to my co-author, Dr. Andrew Newberg, who is a neurosurgeon, an MD neurosurgeon, and a pioneer of meditation research. He lives in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So he and I teamed up to do this paper. So one of the things that was bugging me to get involved in the first place was the rather loose definition of meditation. Excuse me. And that it needed to be addressed because two people could get together and talk about it and be talking about two different things when they thought they were talking about the same things, if that makes any sense. So I'll give an example. So let's say you're on the phone with one of your buddies, and you say, "Well, what did you do this weekend?" And he said, "I spent the whole weekend gardening." And you go, "That's a coincidence. I spent the whole weekend gardening too. You know, we both were doing the same thing this weekend." Well, if you investigate a little further in the conversation, it turns out your friend was weeding. He was picking out the weeds and spraying weed killer in his garden. That's what he was doing. You, on the other hand, were planting flowers in your garden. So he was killing things, and you were promoting life and growth. But you both thought you were doing the same thing because you used the word gardening. So gardening is one of these umbrella terms. It's a generic term that could mean a lot of different things. And unless you get into it in more depth, you could think you're discussing the same thing when you're actually not. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely. Makes perfect sense.
Okay.
To me, at least.
So meditation is very similar. It's become a very generic umbrella term. It's sort of weaved its way into our common vernacular, where people can say things such as, if I ask you, Robin, can we get together next week and do a Qigong session? And you say, let me meditate on that and I'll get back to you.
Right.
So, people can say that concert was a unbelievable musical meditation for me. So you could start using the word, and the word is being used in a rather generic way. In the same token, if you look at specific meditation practices, there's so many of them, hundreds of different techniques. If you don't have any specificity about what it is you're talking about, then you can't gain a common understanding of your conversation. And of course, that would then apply to research, more importantly to research. Meditation research started to develop in the 1950s using EEG machines to measure brain activities of people who are meditating. And I think there were like 5 papers published up to 1960 or something like that. I mean, it was very, very rudimentary. Today, in today's environment, you have over 1,000 publications a year. And we're using MRI machines and EEG machines and all kinds of measurements on meditation. So the field has exploded. And as someone who was interested in meditation for many, many years, I would read various research publications, and I was sort of getting upset. It bothered me that there was such lack of clarity, and I could see that researchers were discussing meditation in a very uninformed way. And I saw an opening, a need to hopefully develop a more clear definition of meditation, and I started to research that problem. So that sort of, brought me into this topic that we're discussing today. So yes, it is important for two people to understand what it is they're talking about from each perspective.
So you were finding that meditation as a topic was kind of confused, generic, and kind of abused as a topic in research as well, and just in regular conversation, socially, and also in research.
Yes.
So the need is a clear definition.
Yes, I think another thing that bothered me. Now, I wasn't a researcher. I'd never done any research before. And this sort of pointed, I know I needed somebody to work on this with me who was an experienced researcher. And luckily I found Andrew, and he agreed to work with me on this. But in reading the research, it struck me how naive the discussions were about meditation. I started to think, well, I wonder if these people meditate or even know what meditation is from a personal experience. And it turns out that criteria is rare among meditation researchers.
Right.
So the field, as it started to develop, became known as contemplative neuroscience, meaning the neurophysiological investigation of meditative states. And again, hundreds and then thousands of publications in the field. And I saw a real need for clarity and definition, and I decided to devote myself to trying to come up with a scheme, a method that can be used to come up with a clear definition of meditation. And it took me about a year and a half of working on it virtually every day.
Okay. And you discovered taxonomy.
Well, they kind of go hand in hand. So what I encountered was confusion in the word meditation among researchers. And in investigating, there were, to be fair, a number of researchers that attempted to define it.
Yeah.
And where a taxonomy comes into play, it's very similar, but a taxonomy allows researchers to classify various elements of what it is that they're studying. So the classic example of a taxonomy is Linnaeus with the taxonomy of all living things. So how can we taxonomize plants, insects, animals, birds, fish, etc., and develop the genus and species of every single living thing? What a task. That came from Linnaeus, an absolute genius, 1700s. The field of contemplative neuroscience lacked a taxonomy. That is an overarching theoretical approach that allowed for various methods to be characterized in a way that they could be lumped together in a category that was similar to other methods, that differentiated them from other categories that could be then considered not the same. That was not done. And that is a huge impediment to research, because if a research field does not have a taxonomy, it can't progress. Impossible to progress. So I then, in my quest, went about studying what is a taxonomy. And as a science of taxonomy and systematics, I read several books on it to try and figure out, well, what's the problem here? Why can't we develop a taxonomy for meditation that can hold water, that can be reliable, can it be replicable? And out of that, I then developed a system with Andrew on, one, defining meditation, and two, developing a taxonomy for meditation. And that's what the research paper was about, both of those things.
Okay. Part of the confusion in the research has to do with the method of meditation and the state that is achieved, correct?
Correct.
So how was that manifesting?
Okay, very important distinction. So when we think about meditation, which we discussed pretty much, in our last session, it's a technique for a particular purpose, which allows the practitioner, the person that's using the technique, to move from their mundane state of waking consciousness into an alternative state of consciousness, a very enhanced state, mental state, that's different than the waking state. And there are various different enhanced states, and they are achieved by the application of the method. So we have two different things occurring here, both of which are referred to as meditation. So some researchers, when they talk about meditation, are talking about the methods that are used. Some researchers, when they're talking about a meditation, are talking about the states that are derived, the mental states that are derived from the methods. And that's two completely different animals. And this is what sort of contributes to the confusion, as well as, and this is a very important point for research, the neuropsychological measurements, whether it be EEG or MRI, whatever it is that the researchers are measuring during meditation, that there are different parameters associated with applying the method itself, which is highly cognitive state from the resultant state of meditation. Different neurophysiological parameters arise. And if you don't differentiate the two, then it's confusing. What is it you're measuring? Are you measuring the state that the person's in? Are you measuring the method that they're utilizing? Something in between? And so it became very important to make that distinction. I thought it was extremely important to make that distinction, and previous researchers had been working on this problem for years. I can give some examples of that, of definitions of what they have come up with that might help.
Yes.
Okay. So, we have, again, there's been a history of this. Attempts to define meditation went back to the 80s, where they decided to focus on the fact that this was a mental exercise. And the individual is attempting to turn their attention or awareness towards a single object, a concept, a sound, an image, an experience, with the intention, this is very important now, with the intention of trying to gain some kind of greater spiritual or experiential, existential type of insight. Ultimately achieving some kind of improved psychological, spiritual well-being. Now, these are important because it differentiates meditation from other mental disciplines. So if you think of meditation as a mental training regime, a meditation method is a mental training regime, well, then how is that different than, let's say, training oneself to do, let's say, complex mathematical calculations in your mind, in your head?
Right.
Or training yourself to count cards so that you could win in playing blackjack.
Yeah.
Or, training yourself to remember everything that you saw in the last 5 minutes in exquisite detail. Okay, these are mental training exercises. Now, how is that different than meditation? Well, meditation, you're adding in that there's some kind of spiritual well-being associated with this particular mental training exercise. That's different than these others that I just mentioned.
Right.
Okay, so that's one very important component. I'm going to read you another one. It's very interesting. A family of self-regulation mental practices that focuses on training your attention and awareness to bring cognitive and affective mental processes under greater voluntary control.
Right.
Thereby fostering greater well-being and development and or specific desirable qualities such as calm, clarity, and ability to focus. So you're adding this kind of bias now, that this is what this training is for.
Yeah. I can see how that definition would actually cut out some meditation techniques.
Well, then, if that's the case, then they wouldn't be meditation techniques.
Oh, okay.
So what you're doing is you are, through your bias, you're creating a definition that is exclusive, that only those things that fall inside that definition are meditation. Everything else is not. So, example, when I added my 2 cents onto this, I felt that intention was a very, very important part of this process. That is, the person had to intend through their own will to use this technique for the particular purpose of achieving a certain state. So intention became important. So that then excluded other alternative states, such as walking through the park one day and suddenly, you have an out-of-body experience or a very profound alternative state just comes over you. You lose track of who you are and where you are, and you just become absorbed in the moment.
Unintentionally.
This happens to people.
Yeah.
Some people get very scared about something like this. Okay, well, people could say, well, that was a meditation. So by setting certain criteria and saying it has to be intentional, that excludes those kind of spontaneous, surreptitious moments that occur. Okay, that's not meditation then. By this particular narrow definition that we're working towards, you and I, in our discussion right now. Then you can also exclude, taking LSD or mind-altering drugs. Okay, and then achieving a very profound mental state that gives you great insight into yourself and to the nature of life and the human condition. Well, that would not be a meditation because you're using something extrinsic to help you get there. So that meditation, by this narrow definition, is using only the prescribed technique and not using any outside substance to help you get there.
Okay.
As well, meditation, as we are defining it here, is sort of a self-reliant technique. In other words, you need a teacher to help you start and teach you the technique, but then it's something you do by yourself. You can go in a room and turn out the lights and meditate. You don't need to listen to a tape or have your instructor with you. You can do this by yourself. So then that differentiates this alternative state of consciousness from, let's say, being hypnotized.
Yeah.
And getting into a very profound mental state, but somebody is doing something to you, and you're cooperating with that.
So would a guided meditation where people stick on a tape or a CD every day, that would not come out under the definition of meditation?
That is a form of meditation that you could ultimately do yourself. You don't need the tape to do it. And certainly you could consider that meditation, but for the purposes of what I'm describing now, that would be exclusive. You would exclude those kinds of influences and use just self-reliant. Why? Remember that this definition was particularly intended for researchers, right?
Right.
So you've got somebody who's researching the meditative state, and what are you going to be playing a CD or something at the same time? Or, it's too obtrusive. It's not necessary. So you could get at meditative states through other methods, and so we kind of excluded those extrinsic factors that help people get to a enhanced mental state.
So how did the idea of meditation being a process come about?
Okay, so now we had these researchers who had fully bought into, well, meditation is a method. And that method can be delineated in words. And essentially what it is, it's a set of instructions that the person needs to follow. Then you got other researchers saying, no. I mean, that's important, but what's really important is the state that the person gets into. And we want to investigate that. And so then you start, well, what is and what isn't meditation then? If you go into a meditation retreat, or you go into a monastery, you see monks all dressed in their robes, they're sitting in a lotus position, it's very quiet, maybe there's incense burning, maybe there's soft music playing, They look to be completely absorbed in what they're doing, sitting in that lotus position. Are they meditating? Well, they could be thinking about a football game. I mean, you don't know what's going on in there, right?
Right.
So, from looking at it from the outside, how can you say whether a person is meditating or not? Well, you have to define what it is you mean. So, in very detailed, intensive discussions with a nuclear physicist, a friend of mine, who taught me about the processes of physics, we developed the idea that, well, rather than an either or, why don't we consider meditation to be a process that is inclusive of both the method and the state? That what meditation actually is, it's a process where the meditator moves through certain stages of mental processes over time. And that's what the meditation is. It's a process. So based on that assumption, we developed a sort of a flow diagram of various stages that are part of this process that would then help define what meditation is.
I've found that process to be very useful. I follow a process in my own training, and I think it's a very useful way to think about it. So could you tell us the steps of the process?
Okay, certainly. And by utilizing these steps, and unfortunately, we don't, have the visual here, because I think the visual really helps a great deal in describing the process and the 6 stages of it. But the first step of the process is your normal waking consciousness, which researchers call mundane consciousness. And, each of these stages actually have their own neurophysiology that's associated with it. And we're not going to get into that in any kind of detail today. But they could be considered distinct stages because they have their own distinct neurophysiology. And waking consciousness has its own distinctive neurophysiology. So you and I right now, while we're talking, we're in our normal state of waking consciousness. The next stage, for the meditation process, has to do with intention. And since this is defined by intentionality, that is, you want to meditate, and you want to engage in the process of meditation. So that's your intention, your willfulness. Well, your intention is a very well-studied mental process, and neurophysiologically. And it has its own neurophysiological signature of when you engage mental capacities of intention. And that comes next in the process. You can't begin without that. So you have the intention to engage in this process. So Robin says to himself, okay, well, time to meditate. Okay, well, that intention is beginning. And Robin then opens the door to his little quiet room, goes in, closes the door, and turns out the light and sits in his favorite chair. But Robin has his own particularities associated with this. Robin has this one cushion he really loves to meditate on. In fact, he's very attached to this cushion. And he uses that cushion every single time. And Robin, he likes to burn incense when he starts his meditation. So he also, he's a real quirky guy. He's got this shawl that his teacher gave him that he wraps over his shoulders and he wears while he's meditating. Well, these kind of quirky things we don't think are absolutely necessary for meditation, but they're sort of like accoutrements for meditation. And I kind of put those in the stage of what I call preliminaries.
Okay.
They're sort of enhance the possibility that meditation will occur. It's part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, it's more elaborate than others. Some people need it and some people don't, but it comes after the intention. So, and even if it's as simple as turning out the light and sitting down, that's just a preliminary. The next step would be engaging the method. So whatever method that you've been trained in, whatever is required that you do next, usually it's focusing on something or remembering a particular narrative of some kind, to give two examples, or putting your mind in a state where of unattachment to anything, of just observing what your mind is doing. It's another particular technique. Whatever technique you've decided to use, you're engaging that method next in this stage. How am I doing so far?
Great. Normal.
Keep going.
So we're on the normal state of mind. We
We're still
make a
in the
decision.
normal state of mind.
We make
right?
a decision to begin meditating. We
Yep.
do some preliminary things, get comfortable. Then we bust into our method.
Right.
And that's
We
where
engage.
we are.
We say we engage the method.
Engage the method.
We access the method. Now we're still in our mundane state of consciousness at that time, right?
Right.
Well, the intention of this particular method, whatever it is that we've been trained to use, will, if successful, move us into a different state of consciousness, an enhanced state of consciousness, an altered state of consciousness. That's what these methods are intended to do in the short term,
Right.
at that moment, during that session. So, if we're successful, we move into an enhanced mental state. We could talk more about what that is. I developed a way of thinking about that there are essentially three different types of mental states that you could go into that are orthogonally different. We'll go into that later.
Yeah.
But for right now, just say that, the method is working, and we're in this enhanced state. So remember, we started out that it's either a method or a state. So now we use the method, and it worked, and we're in the state.
Right.
And we're in that enhanced state either momentarily or for long periods of time, depending on various factors. And at some point, we're in that state and our mind wanders. And we're no longer in that state anymore. And we say to ourselves, whoops, my mind is wandering. I want to get back into that state again. And maybe we access the method. And that brings us back to that state again. So it's a dynamic process that maybe we move in and out of that state. Okay. Accomplished meditators can stay undisturbed in an enhanced mental state for long periods of time.
Right. And
that takes years of practice.
That's where you see people sitting for hours and hours, and presumably they're in that enhanced state continuously.
Right. That's right. Now, if they were hooked up to certain kind of machines, we could tell.
Right.
Okay. Now, an MRI machine wouldn't really be good because you're lying down and it's making a lot of noise, right? Mm. But if you were hooked up to an unobtrusive EEG machine, or even something that was monitoring your breath, or a galvanic skin reaction machine to measure whether your sympathetic and parasympathetic responses, we could tell whether you were daydreaming, okay, whether you were cheating,
yeah.
or not,
Although
right?
it's pretty hard to sit for hours and hours on end and just be thinking about football scores. I mean, that's a skill in itself, really.
Yeah, I think I could do that. Anyway, so you're now in this next stage, which is the enhanced state, which is why you went in the room in the first place to get to that state. And at some point, barring that you set an alarm clock to remind you and the alarm goes off, or somebody knocks on the door, the thought comes to mind, hey, I'm ready to finish. The thought comes to mind, hey, time to get out of this. And you wind out of it and you say, okay, I'm finished now. And you return back to your normal state of consciousness. So that's sort of like the cycle.
That's the process. Normal, beginning, prelims, method, enhanced state, time to finish.
Yep. And then back to your normal state again. So this is what we're saying now, and this is new, that if you want to define meditation, define it as the process inclusive of method and state.
Yeah.
And it allows for certain anomalies to what I just described. For example, a very seasoned meditator with a lot of experience could go into the room, turn off the light, sit down, and go right into their enhanced mental state immediately.
Yeah.
At will. We call this, it's been called the methodless method. In other words, you don't need the method anymore. I mean, the method is really a means to an end. So, is that person meditating? He didn't use the method. Well, we would say, by our definition, yes. He didn't need to use the method. He just went right into an enhanced mental state.
Right, but it's still meditation because he had the intention to go and do it. He got the state and he finished.
Right. Now, what about the novice? Goes into the room, turns out the light, sits on the chair, intends to meditate, uses the method, and nothing happens. In other words, unsuccessful. There is no enhanced mental state that occurs.
Yeah.
Just let's say the method is concentrating on the breath. Now, he or she is really good on concentrating on the breath. There's a technique, a breath concentration technique, in where you count. Breathe in, breathe out, 1. Breathe in, breathe out, 2. Breathe in, breathe out, 3. This person can do breathe in and breathe out and count up to 100, no problem, without losing track, not wandering off to the point where, oops, what number was I up to? And have to start all over again. Like when you were a kid learning the alphabet. If you got distracted in the middle, you had to go back to the beginning again in order to get it, right?
Yeah.
So, no, this person can go up to 100, could go up to 200. No problem. But the enhanced mental state is never achieved. Is that person meditating or not? Now, we would say yes, because they had the intention to meditate, they tried, they sat, they engaged the method, they are meditating.
Right.
Now, that's a leap. Certainly others could say, no, that's not meditating. If they didn't achieve an enhanced mental state, EMS, acronym, EMS, they're not meditating. Okay, we decided to be a little bit more generous with that. What if you went in there and you engaged the method and somebody burst into the room and you had to stop? Were you meditating or not? Well, it's debatable. So there's all kinds of extraneous factors that could occur here that may interfere with the method being successful.
Right.
And some of those are if you went out the night before and really tied one on, and the next day you're still groggy, and you attempt to meditate and you just can't do it.
Yeah.
Okay? There's, maybe your blood alcohol level is still too high. There's something going on that is sort of blocking your ability to achieve this enhanced mental state. There's all kinds of extraneous factors. You could be sick. You could be disturbed by outside stimuli that prevent you from working. So, again, we then look to define meditation as a process. It has to be intended. It is confined to those mental training exercises that have this sort of well-being associated with it. You're attempting to help yourself to gain well-being, whether it be ability to concentrate more, to calm yourself down, to be able to be a person that could concentrate on things for a longer period of time. It has to be in that vein. So before we move on, I just want to share a bias about the ability to control your mind. Now, you will hear this a lot out there.
Yeah.
I want to meditate to control my mind. In fact, some of your previous interviewees on the Warrior Scholar series, would mention that. The ability to control your mind. Now, my bias is no, you can't really control your mind. I mean, the nature of mind, of us as humans, is that the mind is very active and wanders. In fact, this has been demonstrated through contemplative neuroscience research. It's almost like a characterization of mind, a character of mind, an essential quality of mind is its ability to wander.
Right.
And it's theorized that that's actually necessary for health. And they've called it, I hope you're sitting down, stimulus independent thought, SIT.
Right, okay.
Mind, yeah, so that you don't need anything. Just close your eyes and your mind goes. You don't have to, be hit with any outside stimulus.
What is the point of that?
Of what?
Of that ability of the mind to just continually wander from one subject to another. There must be some kind of evolutionary purpose. Yeah,
one would think. Both an evolutionary purpose and a functional purpose in the moment. And, so there's theories about it. Okay, we don't really know, but from what I've read, one theory, which seems to make sense to me, is it keeps the mental machinery running. It's like, yeah. So, you've got all these synapses going on, these millions of neurons and synapses in the brain, and it just keeps it, keeps the machine working, keeps everything running smoothly. And then when you need to access the ability to focus, you can. Okay. And, the mind, but when there's no stimulus, that's why it's called stimulus independent thought. When there's no stimulus, well, the mind needs to just keep working. So one of the purposes of meditation, of one of the methods of meditation, is to quiet all that down. Quiet down that monkey mind. Take a break from the exercise, of the mental exercise that is going on constantly, 24/7. Take a break and actually reach a point of nothingness. Okay, we'll get into that later. But the idea about controlling the mind, so it's virtually impossible to stop that from going on. In fact, it's probably not a good idea to stop all that from going on. So, but then there's also the aspect of what arises. So there are theories of mind. There are very ancient Indian philosophical theories of mind. Very, very interesting, very complex, many textbooks written on this. And if you read it, it'll give you a headache, believe me.
Right.
So, but one of the things that's discussed that I think is very useful is that there are various states that are constantly arising and dissipating in the mind. Various forms of awareness. They're very effervescent. It'll come and go quickly. And one of those, in that category would be emotions or feelings that arise. Okay. So the idea that you could prevent by the force of your own will from these things arising, I think is delusional. I don't think that that's possible.
Okay, I see your point.
Okay. Now, if you want to then sort of modulate that and say, okay, what I really want to do is be calmer. I don't want my mind jumping around so much. I would like to calm down the mind a bit. Okay. Well, that's feasible. And there are meditation techniques where in the moment you could feel more a sense of calm. That is, mind wandering diminishes. Or you could even momentarily make mind wandering go away.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's some carryover in life, in your normal everyday functioning of that. Meaning, it's been shown that experienced meditators have less mind wandering in their normal everyday functioning than people who aren't meditators or novice meditators.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so they've trained their mind so that they can focus, and as we talked before about being mindful in the moment, being aware in the moment. So an experienced meditator can do that easier and maybe for a sustained period of time more so than a novice or a non-meditator, because mindfulness is the opposite of mind wandering.
Right.
Okay. Mindfulness is an antidote of mind wandering. And so that's where mindfulness techniques come in. Now, why is this considered calming the mind? Well, concentration techniques, which are from the Buddhist tradition, the most elementary meditation techniques, which is learning to focus your mind, using a technique to focus your mind, that is, achieve a mental state of one-pointedness. Useful term, I think. So you can train your mind to do that. That's considered and translated as calming the mind. That concentration, one-pointedness, calms the mind. Why does it calm the mind? Because the monkey mind is minimized or reduced or even eliminated, and you go, I've given myself a break.
Right.
There's
Stops the mind wandering, the continual mind wandering.
Right. There's not so much going on at this particular moment, so it's considered to be calming.
Yeah. Jon,
yes.
Sorry. One of the things I would love to get into we looking at, so for example, one-pointed frame of mind, these other techniques, and one of the things that I really, really appreciated in your paper was what you did with the method and the enhanced mental state that we were talking about previously. The method and the state, and how you categorized them into three categories.
Yes.
Could we talk about that, especially in terms of the method and then the enhanced mental state? So the method, we've got these acronyms that we've got CDM, ADM, and NDM, because I think that will plonk in nicely with these states that you're talking about now, and where do they fit in terms of a category?
Okay, so here was the real challenge here. In order to be able to talk about this in a way that could be mutually understood by those people who want to engage in discourse or research about meditation, devising a way that is replicable and has some validity to it. So what we were up against when we took on this task of developing the definition and taxonomy, and we're moving into taxonomy now. You know, we've kind of discussed about definition and what it is and what it isn't, and meditation is a process with these various stages. So now we're moving, when you're asking this question, we're moving into this idea of taxonomy.
Yeah, and I like this a lot.
Okay, good. So in order to talk about the various states and that they are different, the scientific word for it is orthogonal, or orthogonally different. That means it's essentially different, and that there's something essentially different between a bird and a fish. You know, and what are those? Well, a lot of taxonomy methods will say, look at the characteristics of, well, what is it about a bird that makes it a bird and not a fish? You know, so it could be feathers, and a bird flies. You know, a bird has a beak. You know, a fish has gills. A fish, you know, swims under the water, can, quote, breathe under the water, etc. Right? It has scales.
The imagery that kind of springs to mind is you're going through a jungle, you know, with a big net, catching a Zen master and pulling him to one side and going, what is it about him that makes him different from this from this Vipassana master we just caught in the cave? You know?
Yes. Okay. Well, Robin, I would hold those kind of images and fantasies to yourself. Okay. Don't share that with too many people. All right. Anyway, so now that we, you know, that we kind of basically understand taxonomy, those kinds of taxonomies were focused on characteristics that differentiate things. And when researchers and scholars tried to use that technique to categorize meditation methods, they failed. They couldn't do it. Why? Well, there were several reasons that were explained in these various research papers, but one of the reasons are, well, there's just too many of them.
Too many methods.
Too many different methods using too many different techniques, so we can't come up with like 2, 3, 4 categories that everything would either fit in and then be considered separate. That was one, and that, you know, that the purposes and the states that they were intended to achieve are just too ephemeral. You know, they defy description.
Right.
So it became very, very difficult. And, you know, we then postulated, well, okay, it could be that the problem here is that there are too many characteristics and it's too ephemeral, but maybe they're using the wrong taxonomic technique. And, you know, by investigating that, I concluded that you should think of another way of characterizing meditations that doesn't focus on their characteristics. That's called a phonetic approach. Phenetic, a phonetic taxonomic approach. Another taxonomic method is called essentialist. And this is very Aristotelian. Aristotle sort of patterned this for his taxonomies, and that requires that you first articulate the essence of what it is that you're studying. And that's why it's called an essentialist approach. And so I decided to try to apply that taxonomic approach to meditation. And that then requires that you figure out, well, what is the essence? You know, what is the essence of meditation? And so Andrew and I did that. And we then decided that the essence of meditation is what it was intending to do. And the development of that, in terms of its goal, enabled us to develop our taxonomy based on a third-person paradigm. Now, the other thing that we determined was wrong with all previous approaches is that they were based on first-person constructs. That means people were making stuff up. And they would say stuff like, oh, well, meditation, one form of meditation is that it is a focused lens type of meditation, or it's an broad lens meditation, or meditation is focused awareness. Meditation is open presence. That's a different type.
Right.
Open monitoring. Okay, now these were descriptive terms based on as interpreted by the person who. Okay, so that's first person. And there's lots of application for first person categories in research. They're very important. They're very important for the study of consciousness, for example. But it's been shown time and time again over history that it's very ill-suited for the formulation of orthogonal taxonomic categories. Why? Because it's not replicable. People then would start bickering and arguing about what those things mean.
Yeah.
Because they're first person. They're first person categories. They were made up by the person. Well intended, but they were made up. Well, we don't have to go into that today. We don't have the time, but there are, many, many first person categories that were devised to categorize meditation. This is the problem.
Right.
It ain't going to work. So we moved into a third person, which simply means it's something that has been well established over time. It's scientifically sound category or concept. So we went to psychology and the cognitive sciences looking for something like this and came up with affect and cognition. I mean, well accepted, well established, more than 100 years. And we then devised a taxonomy based on the third person construct of affect and cognition that then could be scientifically replicated. That is, cognitive mental states have certain neurophysiological parameters that differentiate it from affective mental states. Affective meaning emotions.
Right.
Okay, so psychological sciences have developed to the point where, okay, we have the cognitive sciences and the affective sciences. We could study those separately because they're not the same.
Mm-hmm.
So cognition, you get into things like mental states of thinking. The thought-dependent mental states, such as planning or hoping or dreaming or concentrating or contemplating or trying to gain insight into something. I mean, these are cognitive states.
Right.
Affective states are like feelings, like love, compassion. Emotions that people will say are matters of the heart, whereas cognitive are matters of the brain. Okay, you can take that as you will, but they're different. And so we developed these enhanced descriptors of enhanced states based on that there would be an enhanced cognitive state, that particular methods were intended to derive. or enhance affective states, which were essentially purely emotional. In fact, they have been described as emotional to the point of exclusion of any thought whatsoever. And then those techniques which are intended to bring the practitioner, the meditator, to a mental state of emptiness, of nothingness, of void, meaning the way it's described in research, the absence of all phenomenological content. There's no thought, there's no feeling, there's no nothing, total emptiness. So we developed that as the third state, and there are many meditation techniques which are intended to get to that state. In fact, schools of meditation that say that is the only credible state of meditation where there's nothing.
Right. Which could be so like
that's
Zen or something like that.
Well, that's Satori. The Zen state of Satori, which is, or the Buddhist state of total absorption of nothingness, of emptiness, no sense of self, no sense of anything. And yet, still in the more, let's say, not the highest or most advanced states of emptiness, where there truly is nothing, you still maintain this metacognition, this witness consciousness, so you know that you're there.
Okay.
You know that you're empty. You know that there's nothing. That's kind of strange to say. But, so
we got these three categories to describe methods, which are cognitive directed method. Am I right?
Well, these three categories describe the states.
The state. Okay.
Okay. So then, the categories of meditation methods are based on the methods that are intended to give the practitioner an experience in one of those three states. Right. So you have, it's kind of awkward to talk about a method as having an intention.
Why?
So, well, because intention is like it's a cognitive faculty of mind.
Okay.
So we then substituted the term directionality, so that the method could be described as moving the state of consciousness in a particular direction to one of three alternative states that we just described, affective, cognitive, or empty. So that methods, we found, could be categorized, successfully categorized, in orthogonal states as independent and not the same, as either cognitive-directed methods, affective-directed methods, or null-directed methods, meaning the absence of both, non-cognitive, non-affective. And so we were able to successfully categorize different popular methods that are out there into one of those three categories.
Which I think is really useful. I think that makes the whole topic more digestible and brings clarity as to what's actually happening and where you're going with meditation.
Yes, what I would like to add, since we, sort of like piggybacking on our last discussion when we encouraged people to pursue meditation in various different venues, being aware of your own nature and what it is that you want, you can pick. So, I mean, if you wandered into a Tibetan Buddhist monastery that mainly promoted loving kindness meditation, which is a particular technique, And that is, an affective directed technique so that you learn how to project your own sense of compassion and well-being and concern for all living things out, project it out for the benefit of all other sentient living beings. That's essentially what the process is. If that's something you really want to do, and you have an affinity for that, okay, that means you're pursuing an affective directed method. Now, if your intention was, no, I'm not ready for that yet. I want to calm my mind first,
Right.
and I want to learn to concentrate. Well, if you're going to do that and learn a particular method to concentrate better, that's a cognitive directed method. That's not the same. Different technique, different intention, different result. I don't know if that speaks to what you were talking about there.
Yeah, I think that does speak to what I was mentioning, and I think if people have this viewpoint, as you just outlined, it will be easier to navigate the complex, seemingly complex topic of meditation. They can decide if the short or long-term benefits that they want may be directed towards performance in their life, or even maybe enhancing their professional performance, then perhaps like a cognitive directed method would be more expedient for them. No?
I would agree with that, yes.
Right. Or if maybe they've done their career, they don't need to achieve much anymore, and they're really interested in this idea of merging with the void, or what they've read about this losing the feeling of ego or something, then a null directed method might make more sense.
Yes.
So that it feels like a very useful tool to navigate meditation, and then also to monitor the results that you're getting. For example, if you're doing a null directed method, and you simply are not still experiencing a lot of attachment, and you're not getting this this feeling of nothingness, perhaps the method is not working.
That could very well be true, that it maybe is not suitable for you at this particular time in your life. And, we need to add here, as you and I have discussed previously, that not all techniques are best suited for everybody.
Definitely.
Yeah, we really need to state that here, because, there are so many factors involved here. With your own tendencies, your own psychological and physical health, your teacher that you wind up with, or the school that you wind up with, which would direct you in certain ways. There's a lot of variables here, and it's not like all these various techniques are suitable for you as a person at this particular stage of your life. So, finding something that works for you right now, based on your own motivation and sort of sense of simplicity versus being overly complex, in your own tendencies. I think that having a basic understanding like this, like you and I are talking about, could be very useful, very helpful in directing you how to go, and also how to assess whether it's working or not. I think that's very important, and important to have somebody to talk to who's more experienced than yourself.
Yeah, you really can't get past the fact that you need a good, experienced, knowledgeable teacher.
Agree.
It's really vital for getting your foot in the door, and also for monitoring you and and keeping you out of trouble.
Well, look, like we said before, there's 20 smartphone apps out there on mindfulness, right? Or you can go on, you could take an online course. No problem. In
Yeah.
fact, I did a 6-month online Vipassana course, which I very much enjoyed.
Okay.
Okay, but I had years and years of experience first, right? As a beginner, I wouldn't advise it. I wouldn't advise doing these totally independent trainings because, you could go off in a tangent somewhere, you could get lost, or you could be doing things that are harmful or non-useful, and you won't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would definitely steer away from those. I think they're too fraught. Now, after a period of time, when you've got a lot of experience under your belt, I think it's less risky to do those kinds of things.
Absolutely. Yes. Those are very good points. And just to further illustrate the point of, every method is not suitable for every kind of person. There isn't really a one size fits all. When I'm dealing with my clients in qigong and qigong therapy that I sometimes do, I will have to employ radically different tactics with one client to the next because they may just, some people are physically it's impossible for them to stand and enter a state of meditation, even if they're guided. It could be physically impossible, or it could be mentally impossible for them because their mind may be just too frantic. So I would have to employ different methods to get a result. So it's my direct experience that certain methods are not suitable for some, and they should find a method which is right for them.
Yes, through the aid of someone who is experienced.
Yeah. Okay, so Jon, using this taxonomy, could we look at 3 very well-known methods of meditation and see how they would fit into this model?
That's a good idea.
Okay.
It may help people to understand it better. So just before I launch into that, I just want to clearly articulate what the goal was in the first place. Now, remembering this was intended for contemplative neuroscience researchers. Okay, that's what the paper was for. I'm just going to just recite what the goal was. The overall goal is to provide researchers with a reliable nomenclature with which to categorize and classify diverse meditation methods and present a conceptual framework which provides direction for their research and a theoretical basis for their findings. That's a mouthful.
That is a mouthful. I'm glad you had to read that.
That's a mouthful. But just specifically, then, how to categorize and classify diverse meditation methods. Okay? So, let's take some methods and see how it falls in or doesn't fall into the categories that we have developed.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to do now. Now, I do think we should use one example of each of the domains.
Yes.
Okay. So if we take transcendental meditation first, which is close to my heart because that's how I got introduced to meditation 45 years ago. And so I know it very well. If we take transcendental meditation, what happens there is that when you go to the school, you sign up, and you start to learn this, they give you a mantra. And what a mantra is, it's a sound. Some people could say it's a word, or usually based in Sanskrit. Other people say it's a sound. But it's not it's not really vocalized. It's internal. So it's a sound that's you say in your own mind, but not necessarily, you don't say it out loud. In fact, they encourage you never to say it out loud for whatever reason. So you're given a sound, you're given a mantra. The definition of mantra, the translation of mantra, is something that protects the mind. Rather interesting. But, we think of it as a sound. So you're given this sound, and you're trained to develop an affinity and awareness of this sound when you're in your quiet room trying to meditate. And TM is different than a lot of other techniques in that it's not a concentration technique. In other words, your teacher doesn't want you to concentrate on the sound. What they want you to do is sit quietly and become aware in a very soft way of the sound in your mind. And by allowing this awareness to sort of kind of dominate your mental state, it facilitates a shift in consciousness from your normal state of consciousness to what TM calls pure consciousness. And the term pure consciousness is a term that they use and was articulated by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And it comes from Vedanta, which is an ancient Hindu philosophy. And essentially what pure consciousness is the null state, the absence of phenomenological concepts.
So this would be the null-directed method.
This is a null-directed method. People have tried, other researchers, commentators have tried to put TM in a cognitive-directed method, and saying, no, it's just a concentration on a mantra.
Right.
But
you're specifically encouraged not to focus on the mantra.
Right. You don't want to concentrate. It's not a cognitive directed method. Okay. Which cognitive directed methods, one of which is to develop one-pointedness. So, if you were just concentrating on that mantra so that there's nothing but that mantra in your consciousness, right? You will have not achieved a shift in consciousness. You'd just be concentrating on a mantra. That mantra is intended to facilitate a shift in consciousness. So it's a very gentle awareness, and ultimately, if you're successful, it will move you, and suddenly you're aware that there's nothing going on. And so that means it was successful. So we will say that TM is a null-directed method, and TM proponents would agree with that.
And it leads to a non-cognitive, non-affective state.
That's right.
Right. Okay.
If you're doing it properly. Okay. So that's TM. Now, I know you mentioned Vipassana.
Yeah.
And we also mentioned Zen.
Yeah.
And both of those are cognitive. So let's for a moment just drift off and say, well, what would be an affective directed method?
Yes.
And the one that I like to use as an example would be a Tibetan meditation technique. And it's loving kindness, loving kindness technique. And those of the listeners out there may have heard of compassion and loving kindness techniques.
Yeah.
that are considered to be meditation techniques.
Yes, the Dalai
These
Lama.
are based.
The Dalai Lama often
There you go.
helps people along with
There you
that,
go.
with those types
Yes,
of techniques.
very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. The major proponent of Tibetan Buddhism in the West, the Dalai Lama, and compassion is a very, very important part of Tibetan Buddhism. Very important, essential. And one learns to cultivate their sense of compassion and loving kindness through techniques which are basically discursive. Discursive meaning there's a whole narrative associated with it. It's kind of similar to what you said before, that somebody could put on a tape that is a guided meditation.
Yes.
Well, compassion and loving kindness techniques are guided meditations to a certain extent. You learn this narrative and you could say it to yourself. And you go through various stages of cultivating and projecting compassion, very specific stages, ultimately reaching a state where there's no narrative anymore, that the practitioner is sort of overwhelmed with this just very intense sense of compassion or loving kindness. And whereas that's all that there is. That is that you're just immersed in this very intense, blissful emotion to the exclusion of all thoughts. That kind of technique, obviously, would be an affective directed method.
Right. Leading to to enhanced affected state.
Yes.
If it's successful.
Which is totally immersed in this emotion, this affect of loving kindness, as an example.
So that leaves us with an example of a cognitive directed method.
Yes, a cognitive directed method. Now, Zen is good. We can use Zen. But just remember, Zen is an umbrella term.
Yes.
Like gardening that we talked about earlier, okay? So we really can't say Zen and intend that that's specific, because it's not. There's many different Zen techniques, as you know, because you're more experienced with Zen. You're more experienced with Zen than I am. I am not a Zen practitioner, but I've read about it. So if you're going to use a koan Zen technique, and that is a method that's used by one of the schools of Zen Buddhism, called the Rinzai school of Zen Buddhism, and you're using a koan, which is it's a saying. Again, it's discursive. In other words, there's a narrative involved here. And, you could probably describe a koan better than I can, because you've used this technique. Would you care to give it a try?
I can't say that I've actually used the technique, but I understand that it could be a paragraph or a sentence, often seemingly illogical, which a practitioner is given to ponder in the hope that they will discover an awakening through studying it.
Okay, very good. Couldn't have said it better.
And often
better myself.
They're seemingly paradoxical, quite often.
Yes, that's right. They're paradoxical riddles. And in this particular type of technique, it's very important to have a teacher who is challenging you, challenging your concepts of reality. And so the intention of trying to get to a higher state of consciousness by contemplating a koan is very cognitive. It's similar to Vipassana in that the ultimate goal is insight, is a realization of some kind. And it's a very high level of cognition in which you're in an enhanced state in order to be able to realize this insight. And so Cohen type of meditation would be considered a cognitive directed method, much the same as Vipassana would be.
Now, here's the interesting thing about the koan, because they're often used to sort of discombobulate the practitioner's view on reality so that they see reality as it really is, which is often described as void and devoid of characteristics. So does it sound like it would make sense that they would be using a cognitive directed method, however the enhanced mental state ideally would end up being a non-cognitive, non-affective state?
Yes, and that would be for a more highly experienced practitioner.
Right.
Now, I'm going to jump in here about reality because, there are various ways to define what we mean by reality, and although we use it very loosely in common discussion, so, you have a mundane definition of what is real and what isn't real. And then you have a more spiritual definition of reality. So you have a conventional definition, and then you have a much more non-conventional definition of reality, what is real and what isn't real. And in various forms of meditation practice, meditation discipline, that is specifically addressed, that you gain insight into the true nature of the human condition, of reality. So the ultimate goal of Vipassana meditation is that through direct experience of using a technique, the Vipassana technique, the practitioner realizes directly. It's beyond understanding. I like to call it overstanding, but it's a personal realization of the three universal characteristics of the human condition, which the Buddha described as non-self, dukkha, and impermanence. Dukkha meaning suffering. It's a general term. I don't like that as a single definition of it, but it's sort of a conventional definition of dukkha. Impermanence, we all kind of understand what impermanence is, but that everything is impermanent, not only physical things, but mental things as well. And non-self is the Buddha's major contribution to the understanding of the human condition, in which that we really can't find the locus or the site or the tangibility of the ego self. That there's something that is absent of self, that we are as humans. And the Buddha said that you can derive a appreciation of that, a complete understanding of that, by using a particular meditative technique and using other techniques. Vipassana is directed towards a full appreciation of those three universal conditions. Very similar to what we were talking about with Zen.
To come back to that model, you may use a method such as cognitive directed method. You may achieve an enhanced cognitive state, but there may still be other states of mind which you will achieve through those methods. But those enhanced mental states are things that can be monitored.
Okay, yes. And now you're bringing up...
Or have I just opened a can of worms?
No, you're bringing up a can of worms in that it's, I think, rather foolish to think that these states are totally exclusive, like nothing else is happening or nothing else can happen. It's oversimplifying things.
Yeah.
So that what we're really talking about is, number one, what happens at the moment during meditation. That can be studied by researchers that can have demonstrable neurophysiological parameters that differentiate it. Okay? So, yes, you could be in an enhanced affective state. In fact, no cognitive scientist would ever say that cognition and affect are totally orthogonal, meaning
Totally separate.
that there's no bleeding in from one state to another.
Right.
There's no overlap at all. No, that's not realistic.
Mm-hmm.
But you can say that, I don't know if we could put a percentage on it, but mostly so. That the intention is mostly so. The intention is mostly affective to be able to project loving kindness and compassion to the world. Not to say that you wouldn't think to yourself, wow, this is pretty cool what's going on right now. Right? So that's certainly possible and likely. So yes, that you could have an enhanced cognitive state of one-pointedness, but ultimately the intention could be an appreciation of nothingness.
Yeah.
And so the Buddha described these techniques as preliminaries for the ultimate sense of nothingness, of non-self. But that you needed to train your mind step by step. And so these were very useful techniques to go step by step. That samatha, or concentration, should essentially precede vipassana because it's training the mind so that you can then move on to vipassana. And that there are other very advanced techniques we're not going to go into today, which lead to state of nothingness. So it could be looked at as a progression,
Right.
and not necessarily mutually exclusive.
Fantastic. I would recommend that people check out this taxonomy. If they are interested in meditation and if they are going to navigate the world of meditation, this explanation can help a lot, and I think can help you even understand your own practice, your own training more. So if people would like to read the paper, how should they get that, Jon?
Okay, I'll say it slowly. Again, you can Google it.
Yep.
It's open source, which I love. And the title is Toward a Unifying Taxonomy and Definition for Meditation.
Beautiful.
That would take you there. I mean, you don't need to put my name or Andrew's name in there. You could if you wanted to. I'm Jonathan Nash, and it's Andrew Newberg. And it was published in the Frontiers for Psychology in October of 2013. But I think if you just Googled taxonomy of meditation, you'd find my article as well.
Right. Very cool. Very, very cool. I am very grateful that you produced that paper. It directly benefits me from a purely selfish thought process, and I think it will benefit a lot of other people. So I thank you for the hard work that you put into that.
Well, you're welcome. I just hope this wasn't too esoteric and boring for your listening audience. I hope that they would find some things that we've discussed that would be worthy of further consideration on their part. And as my spiritual teacher tells me, take in what you would find worthy of consideration and potentially useful, and feel free to gently discard all those things that are not. It's up to each individual, and I hope that it proves useful for some.
Thank you so much, Jon. And I'm looking forward to more conversations with yourself.
Me too. Thanks again, Robin, for thinking that this was worthy of discussing with your listening audience. I appreciate that.
Cheers.
Take care now.
Hey, this is Robin Gamble, thanking you for listening, hoping you enjoyed the content, and kindly asking you to share with your friends if you did. Thanks again, and see you next time.